Some lies are told to protect the ones we love, but the cost of silence can be greater than any truth. England, 1825. The library of Havisham Manor stood silent in the afternoon light, dust motes drifting through rays of sun that fell across worn leather spines and polished mahogany. Lady Margaret Fairmont Linden, Duchess of Havisham, sat at the writing desk near the window, her fingers tracing the edge of an unopened letter. The cream-coloured envelope bore her husband's name in bold script, but it was the single word visible through the translucent paper that had arrested her attention. Orphanage. Margaret's heart quickened as she turned the letter over in her hands. Christopher had been gone for nearly a fortnight, another of his frequent trips to London on matters of business he rarely explained. In the 5 years since their son's death, these absences had become routine, each departure leaving Margaret more isolated within the vast estate that felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed prison. She should not open correspondence addressed to her husband. Years of proper upbringing reminded her of this fact even as her fingers broke the wax seal. The letter unfolded in her trembling hands, and Margaret began to read. Your Grace, I write with news regarding the inquiry you commissioned 5 years past. After extensive investigation across 3 counties, I have reason to believe the child described in your original correspondence may have been located at St. Catherine's Orphanage in Yorkshire. The boy's age, appearance, and the timing of his arrival at the institution align with the details you provided. I await your instruction on how to proceed with verification. Your faithful servant, Edmund Price, Private Investigator. The words blurred as Margaret read them a second time, then a third, her mind struggling to make sense of what lay before her. 5 years passed. The child described in your original correspondence. The boy's age and appearance. The room tilted sickeningly. Margaret gripped the edge of the desk, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Their son had not died. Christopher had known. For 5 years, while she had grieved alone, while she had visited that small grave in the estate cemetery, while she had slowly died inside, her husband had been searching for their living child. The letter slipped from her fingers, drifting to the carpet below. Margaret tried to stand, but her legs would not support her. The library spun around her, bookshelves and furniture blending into a nauseating whirl of brown and gold. She reached out, grasping at nothing, and then the floor rose up to meet her as darkness claimed her vision. She did not hear the commotion in the entrance hall some time later, nor the rapid footsteps ascending the stairs. She did not hear Christopher's voice, sharp with concern, asking the housekeeper why his wife's sitting room was empty. She remained suspended in unconsciousness, her mind mercifully blank, as her husband searched the manor for her. It was Christopher himself who found her, pushing open the library door to discover his wife lying motionless on the carpet, her chestnut hair spilled across the floor, her face pale as death. For one terrible moment, he stood frozen in the doorway, transported back 5 years to another scene of helpless horror. Margaret, he breathed, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms, his fingers seeking the pulse at her throat. Relief flooded through him as he felt the steady beat beneath her skin. Margaret, can you hear me? His gaze fell upon the letter lying nearby, and his blood turned to ice. The envelope bore his name in Price's distinctive hand. Christopher reached for it with shaking fingers, confirming his worst fear. She had read it. She knew. Send for Dr. Whitmore, he called to the footman who had appeared in the doorway. Immediately, Christopher lifted Margaret carefully, carrying her to the sofa near the fireplace. He loosened the collar of her day dress, noting the rapid rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyelids fluttered without opening. Guilt, sharp and bitter, rose in his throat. 5 years. 5 years of maintaining this terrible secret, convincing himself each day that it was for her protection, that discovering the truth without certainty would destroy her more surely than the grief she already bore. And now she had discovered it in the worst possible way, alone, without preparation or explanation. Margaret's eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding their green depths. For a moment, she seemed unsure of where she was. Then her gaze focused on Christopher's face, and memory returned. He watched understanding dawn, followed immediately by fury so intense it made her whole body rigid. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She pushed against his chest, struggling to sit upright despite her obvious disorientation. "Margaret, please, let me explain." "Explain?" The word came out as something between a laugh and a sob. "You wish to explain how you have lied to me for 5 years, how you have allowed me to grieve a child who may yet live while you conducted secret investigations behind my back." Christopher withdrew his hands, giving her space, though every instinct screamed at him to hold her, to comfort her. It was not meant to be discovered this way. "How was it meant to be discovered?" Margaret demanded, finally managing to sit fully upright. The colour was returning to her cheeks, flushed now with anger rather than pale with shock. "When, Christopher? When were you planning to inform me that our son might be alive?" He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of frustration she had seen countless times over the years. "When I could bring him home to you. When I had certainty, not merely hope and speculation." "You had no right," Margaret said, each word precise and cutting. "No right to make that decision for me. He was my son too." "I know." Christopher's voice was rough with emotion. "I know, and I am sorry. But Margaret, you must understand." "I understand nothing," she interrupted, rising unsteadily to her feet. Christopher moved to assist her, but she waved him away. "I understand that the man I married, the man I trusted, has been keeping the most important secret imaginable from me. I understand that every word of comfort you offered, every assurance that time would heal the wound, was a lie. That is not fair." "Fair?" Margaret laughed again, the sound bitter. "You speak to me of fairness? For 5 years, Christopher. 5 years I have lived with this grief, and you—" Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting for composure. The library door opened, admitting Dr. Whitmore, a portly man in his 60s who had served the Linden family for decades. He took in the scene with a practiced eye, noting the letter on the floor, the Duchess's obvious distress, the Duke's guilty expression. "Your Grace," he addressed Margaret formally, moving to her side. "I understand you suffered a fainting spell. Please, allow me to examine you." Margaret submitted to the examination in stiff silence, while Christopher stood by the window, his back to the room, shoulders tense beneath his travelling coat. The afternoon sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the carpet. "Your pulse is elevated, but otherwise you seem physically well," Dr. Whitmore concluded, stepping back. "However, I would recommend rest and perhaps a mild sedative to calm your nerves." "I do not require sedation," Margaret replied coolly. "I require truth." Dr. Whitmore glanced between husband and wife, clearly uncomfortable with the tension that filled the room. "I shall prepare a tisane regardless, should you change your mind." "Your Grace?" He nodded to Christopher. "Might I have a word?" The two men stepped into the hallway, leaving Margaret alone in the library. She sank back onto the sofa, her earlier fury giving way to a more complex mixture of emotions. Hope warred with betrayal, desperate longing with bitter resentment. If their son lived, if he could be found and brought home, would that not make everything worthwhile? But how could she forgive 5 years of deception, no matter how well-intentioned? Her mind drifted back to that terrible night, 5 years past, when her world had shattered. The labour had been long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Margaret remembered the pain, remembered the midwife's concerned expressions, remembered the way Christopher had held her hand until Victoria, his mother, had ordered him from the room, declaring that childbirth was no place for men. She remembered the final push, the exhausted relief when the baby's cry had filled the room. A boy. They had a son, and then confusion. The midwife's face, suddenly stricken, whispered consultations. Victoria's cold voice announcing that the child had been too weak, that he had lived only moments. Margaret had demanded to see him, to hold him, but Victoria had refused. "It will only cause you greater pain," she had said firmly. "The midwife has already prepared him for burial. You must think of your own recovery now." Weak from blood loss and exhausted beyond measure, Margaret had not possessed the strength to fight. She had wept until she had no tears left, while Christopher sat beside her bed in silence, his face carved from stone. The funeral had been small, private. Victoria had arranged everything. The tiny coffin, sealed shut, had been lowered into the ground, while Margaret stood supported by her husband, feeling as though she were being buried along with her son. Christopher had remained composed throughout, his grief, if he felt any, locked behind an impenetrable facade. In the weeks that followed, Margaret had sunk into a darkness so profound she could barely function. She had stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring whether she lived or died. It was Christopher who had insisted on Dr. Whitmore's involvement, Christopher who had ensured she took the medicines prescribed, Christopher who had gradually coaxed her back into something resembling life. But he had never truly been present. Even as he cared for her physical needs, his emotional distance had remained absolute. She had assumed it was his way of coping with grief, that cold reserve so typical of men of his class. She had resented it, but she had accepted it. Now, sitting in the library with Price's letter as evidence, Margaret understood. Christopher had not been distant from grief. He had been consumed by secret purpose, by a search he had hidden from her, from everyone. The door opened again, and Christopher entered alone. Dr. Whitmore had apparently departed. Husband and wife regarded each other across the room, the space between them suddenly vast despite the physical proximity. "I am returning to my chambers," Margaret said, breaking the silence. "I find I cannot bear to be in your presence at this moment." "Margaret, please." Christopher took a step toward her. "Let me explain everything. The circumstances, the reasons." "Tomorrow," she cut him off. "Whatever explanations you have, they can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I need to be alone." She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "I never stopped searching for him. Every day for 5 years, it has been my first thought upon waking and my last before sleep. I know you cannot forgive me now, but I swear to you, Margaret, everything I have done has been to protect you and to bring our son home." Margaret did not turn around. "If you truly wished to protect me, Christopher, you would have trusted me with the truth." She left him standing in the library, the letter lying on the floor between where they had stood, a paper knife that had finally cut through 5 years of careful lies. Margaret did not sleep that night. She lay in her bedchamber staring at the canopy above, her mind churning through 1,000 questions. As dawn broke over Havisham Manor, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, she rose and dressed with the help of her lady's maid, choosing a simple morning gown of dove grey. Her reflection in the mirror showed shadows beneath her eyes, but her expression was composed, determined. She found Christopher in his study, looking as though he too had not slept. He stood as she entered, hope and apprehension warring in his blue eyes. "I want to know everything," Margaret said without preamble, taking the chair across from his desk. "From the beginning. No omissions, no evasions. If you wish me to trust you again, Christopher, it must start now." He nodded slowly, returning to his seat. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as though memorizing her face. Then he began to speak. "3 days after the funeral, I received a visit from one of the stable hands, a boy named Thomas, who had been dismissed by my mother the day after your confinement. He came to me in secret, terrified, saying he had witnessed something he could not ignore in good conscience." Margaret's hands tightened in her lap, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "Thomas had been working late that night, attending to a mare having difficulty with foaling. He saw my mother leave the manor through the servants' entrance, carrying something wrapped in blankets. He heard a baby crying. She loaded the bundle into a carriage and departed with her lady's maid. They were gone for several hours. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through Margaret's body. "She took him," Margaret whispered. "Your mother took our son." "I confronted her immediately," Christopher said, his voice rough. "She denied it, of course, said the boy was mistaken, that what he heard was an animal in distress. But I saw the truth in her eyes, Margaret. She had done something with our child, and she would not tell me what." "Why?" The question emerged as barely more than a breath. Why would she do such a thing? Christopher's jaw tightened. Because she deemed you unworthy of producing the Linden heir. Your father is merely a viscount, your family's fortune diminished by poor investments. She wanted me to set you aside, to marry someone of higher rank who could provide the legacy she believed the dukedom deserved. Anger surged through Margaret, hot and clarifying. She stole my child to force an annulment. I believe she intended to claim the baby died, and then, after a suitable period of mourning, pressure me to dissolve the marriage on grounds of your inability to provide an heir. Christopher leaned forward, his expression intense. I hired Mr. Price that same week. He is discreet, thorough, and has contacts throughout England. I gave him every detail I could provide, every possible lead. And you told me nothing, Margaret said, the hurt still fresh despite her attempt to remain composed. Christopher's face contorted with something close to anguish. I tried, Margaret. 1 month after the funeral, you had finally begun to eat again, to leave your chambers. I thought perhaps you were strong enough to hear that there might have been a mistake. I said that I had received information suggesting the circumstances of our son's death warranted investigation. Margaret frowned, searching her memory. Then it came to her, fragmented but real. Christopher sitting beside her in the morning room, speaking carefully about questions and possibilities, and her reaction. I collapsed, she said slowly, the memory returning with painful clarity. I could not breathe. I thought I was dying. Dr. Whitmore was summoned. He gave you laudanum to calm you, and afterward, when you slept, he told me that your mind could not withstand false hope, that raising the possibility of our son being alive without certainty would likely destroy what remained of your sanity. Christopher's hands clenched on the desk. He advised me in the strongest terms to say nothing until I had concrete proof. So I promised myself I would only tell you once I could bring our son home. The words settled between them, and Margaret felt the first crack in the wall of her anger. She remembered that day, remembered the panic that had consumed her at Christopher's careful words, the sensation of her mind fracturing beneath the weight of a grief already unbearable. If he had told her everything then, if he had explained that their child might be alive somewhere, lost and searching for him, would she have survived it? Every trip to London, Christopher continued, pulling a heavy ledger from his desk drawer. Every journey I made to the north or south was following leads that Price sent me. Orphanages, workhouses, private homes where children had been placed. None of them were our son. He opened the ledger, revealing page after page of meticulous notes. Dates, locations, descriptions of children investigated. Margaret leaned forward, scanning the entries with growing comprehension. 5 years of searching, documented in Christopher's precise hand. 5 years of hope, raised and dashed, of trails followed to dead ends, of exhausting pursuit. I see now the toll it has taken, Margaret said quietly, noting the deep lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair more prominently than she remembered. You have aged 10 years in 5, as have you, he replied gently. We have both paid for my mother's cruelty. A knock at the study door interrupted them. At Christopher's call, the butler entered, followed by a woman Margaret recognized with relief. Lady Claire Hartley, the butler announced before withdrawing. Claire, Margaret's closest friend since childhood, swept into the room in a rustle of blue silk. Her blonde hair was dressed simply, and her blue eyes were sharp with concern as she took in the scene before her. Margaret. I came as soon as I received your note, Claire said, moving to embrace her friend. What has happened? Margaret had sent word to Claire the previous evening, needing someone she could trust beyond the walls of Havisham Manor. Now, with her friend's solid presence beside her, she felt some of her isolation lifting. My son may be alive, Margaret said, the words still strange on her tongue. Christopher has been searching for him for 5 years. Claire's eyes widened, and she looked between the Duke and Duchess. Good heavens, tell me everything. Over the next hour, Christopher repeated his explanation, while Claire listened intently. Margaret watched her friend's expressions shift from shock to anger to cautious hope. When Christopher finished, Claire turned to Margaret. What do you need from me? The simple question, offered without judgment or excessive sympathy, nearly undid Margaret's composure. I need someone who will help me think clearly. I am torn between hope that I might recover my son and fury that I was kept in ignorance of the search. Both feelings are valid, Claire replied firmly. Then, addressing Christopher directly, Your Grace, while I understand Dr. Whitmore's concerns, you must see how this deception has damaged your wife's trust. I do, Christopher acknowledged. More than I can express. Claire nodded, then returned her attention to Margaret. The question now is not whether the deception was justified, but what you will do going forward. If there is a chance your son lives, surely that must take precedence over all other considerations. Margaret knew her friend was right. The resentment, the betrayal, the years of unnecessary grief, all of it paled before the possibility that her child might be found. Show me the letter from Mr. Price, she said to Christopher. The one I found yesterday. He retrieved it from a locked drawer and handed it to her. Margaret read it again with fresh eyes, noting the careful phrasing, the guarded optimism. St. Catherine's Orphanage in Yorkshire, she said. How far? 3 days' travel, perhaps 4, depending on weather and road conditions. Christopher replied. I have already sent word to Price to meet us there. I can have the travelling coach prepared within the hour if you wish to depart today. Margaret looked up at him. Us? You expect me to accompany you? I expect nothing, Christopher said carefully. But I hope you will. He is your son as much as mine, Margaret. You have every right to be present when we find him. Something in his tone, in the way he acknowledged her equal claim, softened another edge of her anger. For 5 years, she had felt dismissed, as though her grief was somehow less significant than his. Now, in this moment, he was offering her partnership. I will come, Margaret decided. But Claire accompanies us. I will not travel alone with you until I have decided whether I can forgive this deception. Of course, Christopher agreed immediately. Lady Claire, would you consent to join us? I will ensure every comfort for the journey. Claire looked to Margaret, who nodded. Very well, Your Grace. Give me 2 hours to return home and pack appropriate clothing. I will meet you here at noon. After Claire departed, Margaret and Christopher sat in awkward silence. Finally, Margaret spoke. I want to see all of it. Every letter from Price, every report, every piece of evidence you have gathered. If we are to do this together, I must understand everything. Christopher rose and retrieved a large wooden box from behind his desk. He placed it before Margaret, opening the lid to reveal stacks of correspondence, maps marked with notations, sketches of children that had been investigated and ruled out. Margaret spent the next 2 hours immersed in the evidence of her husband's secret life. She read letters describing children found in Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester, none matching the description of their son. She studied maps showing Christopher's journeys crisscrossing England, each trip a renewed hope. She saw the financial records documenting the fortune spent on investigators, informants, bribes to officials who might have information. By the time she finished, her perception of the past 5 years had shifted. Christopher had not been cold or indifferent to their loss. He had been consumed by it, channeling his grief into relentless action. It did not excuse the deception, but it explained it in a way that made her anger more complicated, less absolute. I understand why you did it, Margaret said finally, closing the last folder. I do not yet forgive you for it, but I understand. Christopher's relief was visible. That is more than I deserve. Perhaps, Margaret agreed. But if our son is truly at St. Catherine's, if we can bring him home, then perhaps forgiveness will follow in time. The afternoon sun streamed through the study windows as they made their preparations. Christopher sent instructions to the stables for the travelling coach to be readied. Margaret returned to her chambers to pack, choosing practical clothing suitable for travel and the uncertain days ahead. As she folded gowns and selected necessities, Margaret allowed herself for the first time in 5 years to hope. Somewhere in Yorkshire, in an orphanage she had never heard of, there might be a 5-year-old boy with Christopher's blue eyes and her chestnut hair. A child who had been stolen from her, who had lived 5 years without knowing his parents, without knowing he was loved. The grief she had carried for so long transformed into something new, determination. She would find her son. She would bring him home. and God help anyone, including Victoria Linden, who stood in her way. The journey to Yorkshire stretched across 3 days of relentless travel. The Havishire coach, though well appointed with velvet squabs and polished brass fittings, could not smooth the increasingly rough roads that wound through the northern countryside. Margaret sat beside Claire, watching the landscape shift from gentle pastoral scenes to wilder, more rugged terrain dotted with stone walls and distant sheep. Christopher occupied the seat opposite them, his attention alternating between the leather portfolio containing Price's reports and the view beyond the rain-streaked window. Conversation proved difficult. Each attempt at idle talk withered beneath the weight of what awaited them. Margaret found her thoughts circling endlessly. Would they find him? Would he look like the baby she remembered? Would there be some sign, some instinctive recognition between mother and child? On the second evening, they stopped at a coaching inn, where the rooms smelled of damp wool and old smoke. Margaret lay awake long after Claire's breathing had evened beside her, listening to rain drum against the roof tiles. Somewhere ahead, in a place she had never seen, a child might be sleeping. Her child. The thought was too vast to hold steadily in her mind. The morning of the third day dawned grey and drizzling. The coach lurched through muddy ruts as they left the main road, following narrower lanes toward the village where St. Catherine's orphanage stood. When the building finally came into view, Margaret's breath caught. The orphanage was a long, low structure of weathered grey stone, its narrow windows staring like blank eyes across a yard of hard-packed earth. A few children played there under the watchful supervision of a woman in a dark dress and white cap. They paused in their games to stare as the ducal coach approached, their faces pale ovals framed by threadbare clothing. Inside, the building smelled of carbolic soap, boiled cabbage, and the particular mustiness of too many bodies in too small a space. They were shown to a sparse parlour where Mrs. Stevenson, the matron, received them. She was a woman of middle years with iron-grey hair scraped into a severe bun and shrewd brown eyes that assessed her visitors without judgment. "Your Grace," she said, offering a curtsy to Christopher before nodding respectfully to Margaret and Claire. "Mr. Price sent word of your coming. Please be seated." They took the hard wooden chairs offered. A clock on the narrow mantelpiece ticked loudly in the silence that followed. "You wrote to Mr. Price about a boy," Christopher began, keeping his voice steady despite the tension Margaret could see in his jaw. "A child who arrived here as an infant some years ago. Aye, Your Grace." Mrs. Stevenson folded her work-roughened hands at her waist. "We keep careful records. He came to us not quite a fortnight old, brought by a woman who gave neither name nor particulars. Said the mother had died in childbed and the father could not claim him. Funds were provided for his keep." Her gaze moved briefly to Margaret. "Such arrangements are not uncommon here. We do not question what we are not meant to know." Margaret felt Claire's hand find hers beneath the folds of her skirt, a silent gesture of support. "What can you tell us of him?" Christopher asked. "His appearance, his temperament." Mrs. Stevenson's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "He was a quiet babe. Did not cry as some do. As he grew, he had a watchful quality, if Your Grace takes my meaning. Brown hair with a wave to it, blue eyes. There was a small mark here." She touched the inside of her left wrist. "A birthmark, darker than the surrounding skin. We made note of it in our ledger." Margaret's hand flew unconsciously to her own wrist, pressing there as though she could feel the matching mark she knew their son possessed. She had seen it only once, in those brief moments after his birth, before exhaustion claimed her. But she had never forgotten its shape, like a small shadow beneath the skin. "And his name?" Margaret heard herself ask, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "William. We called him William." Mrs. Stevenson's tone remained matter-of-fact, but something in her eyes suggested she understood more than she said. "He remained here until he was near 5 years of age. Then Mr. Caldwell, a merchant from the neighbouring county, came seeking a sturdy boy for his stables. We arranged the placement 8 months past." Christopher leaned forward slightly. "Did the boy ask about his family? His origins?" "At first, yes. Most of them do, when they are young enough to still hope." Mrs. Stevenson's expression remained neutral, though her words carried the weariness of someone who had witnessed too much small tragedy. I told him what I tell them all, that some parents die, some are too poor, some are too proud, and some simply cannot keep them. But that none of it is the child's fault. Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. The image of a small boy asking for a mother who never came, receiving only platitudes and resignation in return, was almost unbearable. Did he have any particular habits? Claire asked gently. Things that brought him comfort. Mrs. Stevenson considered this. He liked to sit by the window when it rained. Said the sound reminded him of someone singing, though he could not say who. Perhaps a nurse from his earliest days. Perhaps only fancy. Children construct memories from wishes sometimes. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. She had sung to her swollen belly during her confinement. Old lullabies her own mother had taught her. Had some echo of that reached her son, embedding itself in his infant consciousness? Mr. Caldwell, Christopher said, returning to practical matters. You believe the boy is still in his household? As far as I am aware, Your Grace. The Caldwell estate lies some miles east of here. They are merchants, well established in shipping and warehousing. Not gentry, but prosperous enough. Mrs. Stevenson paused. Mr. Caldwell is not a cruel man, but neither is he sentimental. To him, the boy is a pair of hands for his stables. Nothing more. That will change, Christopher said quietly. If he is who we believe him to be, he will be brought to Havisham under my protection. Mrs. Stevenson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I hope for the boy's sake that you are right, Your Grace. He has known little enough kindness in his short life. They departed with directions to the Caldwell estate, and Mrs. Stevenson's assurance that she would cooperate with any further inquiries. As the coach pulled away from St. Catherine's, Margaret looked back at the grey stone building and wondered how many children within those walls would never be claimed, never rescued from lives of institutional charity and indentured service. The road to the Caldwell estate wound through thick stands of oak and beech, the branches overhead forming a canopy that filtered the weak sunlight into dappled patterns. When they finally arrived, a liveried servant emerged from the gatehouse to inquire their business, eyeing the ducal crest on the coach door with obvious respect. They were shown into a drawing room that proclaimed its owner's wealth with aggressive clarity. Every surface gleamed with polish, every ornament positioned to maximum effect. Mr. Caldwell himself entered with the hearty confidence of a self-made man, his bow just slightly too elaborate, his smile just a shade too eager. Your Grace, what an unexpected honour, he said, his gaze moving appreciatively over the quality of Christopher's coat and the obvious breeding of the ladies. To what do I owe this pleasure? Christopher dispensed with pleasantries. Mr. Caldwell, I understand you have employed a boy named William, acquired from St. Catherine's orphanage some months past. Ah, yes, the orphanage lad. Caldwell waved a hand dismissively. Working in my stables. Satisfactory enough, or so my head groom reports. Has he given offence? I assure you we do not tolerate thievery or laziness here. This concerns a family matter, Christopher replied, his tone cooling. The boy may be of blood relation to my household. Due to circumstances I need not detail, he was placed at St. Catherine's without our knowledge. We have only recently learned of his existence and whereabouts. Caldwell's eyes widened, calculation flickering behind them. Indeed. Well, that is quite remarkable. He chuckled nervously. Of course, if the boy is connected to your illustrious family, it would hardly be proper for him to remain in service here. I would not wish to stand between a child and his rightful place. I am prepared to compensate you for any inconvenience, Christopher said. You paid the orphanage for his placement. I will reimburse that amount and provide an additional sum for expenses incurred. Most generous, Your Grace. Most generous indeed. Caldwell's smile grew more genuine. Business he understood, even when cloaked in talk of family reunions. While the men discussed terms, Margaret requested permission to see the boy. Caldwell hesitated, perhaps sensing something he could not name, then gestured for a servant to escort her to the stables. The stable yard was a world of mud and straw, of horses shifting in their stalls and grooms moving about their tasks. Margaret picked her way carefully across the uneven ground. her fine kid boots ill-suited to such conditions. A few of the workers paused to stare at the elegant lady so out of place in their rough domain. Then she saw him. He stood near one of the stalls, barely tall enough to see over the lower door, his small hands gripping a brush as he worked methodically over a bay mare's flank. His clothing was too large, sleeves rolled back multiple times, trousers cinched with twine at his narrow waist. Dust and bits of straw clung to his chestnut hair, which curled slightly at his nape. When he turned at the sound of the mare's soft whicker, Margaret saw his face clearly for the first time. It was not a precise copy of either parent, but echoes of both were unmistakably there. Christopher's blue eyes, her own bone structure, a particular set to his mouth that she recognized from her own childhood portraits. Recognition slammed into her with physical force, stealing her breath, her son, her child, alive and whole and real, standing not 20 feet away, unaware that his mother watched with a heart breaking and mending simultaneously. She did not approach immediately. She simply stood, drinking in every detail. The way he moved with careful deliberation, the gentleness with which he touched the nervous horse, the serious expression that sat oddly on such young features. He looked older than 5 in some indefinable way, as though hardship had aged him prematurely. A stable hand noticed her and approached, hat in hand. "Can I help you, my lady?" "I was told there is a boy here named William," Margaret managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I would like to observe him at his work." The man glanced toward the boy. "That's him, my lady. Quiet lad. Does what he's told, without complaint." William, sensing he was being discussed, looked up. His blue gaze landed on Margaret, wary and assessing. There was no flash of recognition, no instinctive pull toward her. How could there be? To him, she was merely another stranger in fine clothing, perhaps come to inspect the horses or deliver instructions to the staff. Margaret offered a gentle smile. "Good afternoon, William." He ducked his head in an awkward approximation of a bow, clearly uncertain of protocol. "Afternoon, ma'am." His voice was soft, with the faint northern inflection he had acquired at the orphanage and here among the Yorkshire servants. The sound of it pierced Margaret to her core. "I hear you are very good with horses," she said, keeping her tone light. He lifted one shoulder in a hesitant shrug. "They're easier than people, ma'am. They don't pretend." The simple observation, delivered without self-pity, nearly destroyed her composure. This child had learned already that people could not be trusted, that words often masked intention, that survival meant watching and waiting. "I am sure they appreciate your honesty," Margaret replied. "Thank you for your time, William. I did not mean to interrupt your work." She stepped back, allowing him to return to his tasks while she remained at a distance, memorizing every movement, every expression, storing them away against future need. When she returned to the house, she found Christopher and Caldwell concluding their arrangement. William would be released from his apprenticeship and placed in the Duke's service as a page at Havisham Manor. The official explanation satisfied propriety. The truth would come later, when the boy could bear to hear it. The coach that departed the Caldwell estate that afternoon carried 4 passengers instead of 3. William sat on the forward bench beside Elizabeth, Margaret's lady's maid, his hands folded tightly in his lap, his eyes darting between his new guardians with poorly concealed apprehension. Margaret longed to sit beside him, to pull him into her arms and never let go, but she forced herself to maintain distance. Claire's hand found hers again, a silent reminder to be patient. "William," Christopher said after they had travelled some distance, "have you ridden in a coach like this before?" The boy glanced around at the velvet curtains, the polished wood, the ducal crest embroidered on the squabs. "No, sir, only wagons." "You will find it more comfortable, I hope," Christopher replied. "You are coming to Havisham as a page. There will be much to learn, but you will be among people who wish you well." William's gaze flicked to Margaret, then away. "Why me, sir?" "There were other boys at Mr. Caldwell's. Stronger ones. Because I asked for you specifically," Christopher said simply. Suspicion and confusion warred in the child's expression. Boys from orphanages did not get chosen for themselves. There was always a reason, a purpose, and purposes were rarely kind. "Do you have children, sir?" William asked, after a long pause. Christopher's eyes met Margaret's briefly before returning to the boy. That is a complicated question, William. Perhaps one day soon, I will be able to answer it properly. William's fingers tightened around the piece of sugared biscuit Elizabeth had given him. I don't have anyone, he said matter-of-factly. Never did. Margaret bit the inside of her cheek to keep from contradicting him, from crying out that he was wrong, that he had a mother who had mourned him every day for 5 years, a father who had searched relentlessly. Instead, she remained still, letting the moment pass. You have people now, Claire said gently. That is something, is it not? William considered this, then gave a small nod, as though willing to accept the premise provisionally. As the coach rolled southward through the gathering dusk, Margaret watched her son's profile in the dim light and felt the weight of all the years stolen from them. The distance between them was not measured in miles, but in memories never made, in lullabies never sung, in scraped knees never kissed, in nightmares never soothed. Closing that distance would require more than a coach ride home. Behind them, somewhere in the gathering darkness, lay St. Catherine's Orphanage and the Caldwell estate, both receding into the past where they belonged. Ahead lay Havisham Manor, and with it, the reckoning that awaited. The Dowager Duchess's letter sat in Christopher's pocket like a coiled snake, its venomous words a promise of conflict to come. But for now, in this moment suspended between past and future, Margaret allowed herself simply to look at her son, to breathe the same air he breathed, to exist in the same space, however fraught with unspoken truths. The journey home had only just begun. Havisham Manor rose before them as the coach rounded the final bend in the drive, its grey stone facade softened by the golden light of late afternoon. William pressed his face to the window, his eyes widening at the sight of the great house with its columns and countless windows reflecting the sun. Margaret watched him absorb the scale of his new surroundings, saw the way his small frame seemed to draw inward, making himself smaller in the face of such grandeur. It is very large, William said quietly, the first words he had spoken in over an hour. It can feel overwhelming at first, Christopher replied. But you will grow accustomed to it. The East Wing is warmest in winter. The library has books on every subject imaginable. The kitchens always smell of fresh bread. William turned from the window to look at Christopher with an expression that suggested he was cataloguing these details, filing them away for future reference. Margaret recognized the behavior. It was what one did when uncertain of permanence, when experience taught that circumstances could shift without warning. The coach drew to a halt before the main entrance where the household staff had assembled to greet them. Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, stood at the centre, her keys jingling at her waist, flanked by footmen in livery and maids in crisp aprons. Their faces showed carefully schooled curiosity as William descended from the coach with Elizabeth's assistance. Mrs. Hughes, Christopher said, this is William. He will be residing with us as a page. Please see that the blue chamber in the family wing is prepared for him. He is to be treated with every courtesy. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose fractionally at the mention of the family wing rather than the servants' quarters, but she curtsied smoothly. Of course, Your Grace. Welcome to Havisham, William. William mumbled something that might have been thanks, his gaze fixed on the ground. Margaret ached to take his hand, to lead him inside herself, but she forced herself to remain still. Claire touched her elbow gently, a reminder to be patient. Inside, the entrance hall stretched upward to a vaulted ceiling painted with classical scenes. William's head tilted back to take in the elaborate plasterwork, the crystal chandelier, the portraits of long-dead lindens gazing down from their gilded frames. He looked impossibly small against such opulence. Elizabeth will show you to your room, Margaret said, keeping her voice gentle. There is a bath being drawn for you, and fresh clothing laid out. When you are ready, we will have supper together in the small dining room. William's eyes darted to her face, searching for something. Perhaps he expected this kindness to come with conditions, to discover later what would be required in exchange. Thank you, ma'am, he said carefully. As Elizabeth led him up the grand staircase, Margaret had to physically restrain herself from following. Christopher's hand settled briefly at the small of her back, understanding without words what the separation cost her. He needs time. Christopher murmured. We cannot simply tell him and expect him to understand. Not yet. I know, Margaret replied, though every maternal instinct screamed otherwise. But knowing and bearing it are different things entirely. Claire remained with them as they moved to the drawing room where tea had been laid out. Margaret poured with hands that trembled slightly, the familiar ritual providing a framework for emotions that threatened to overflow. He looks well enough, Claire observed, accepting her cup. Thin, certainly, and wary, but not broken. He has survived, Margaret said. That is more than many orphans can claim. They spoke in careful tones about practical matters. Where William would take his lessons, which servants should be assigned to assist him, how to introduce him gradually to the rhythms of the household. Beneath the mundane planning lay a deeper current of emotion none of them directly acknowledged. An hour later, when William appeared in the doorway of the small dining room, Margaret barely recognized him. Clean and dressed in proper clothing, a simple but well-made jacket and trousers, his damp hair combed back from his face, he looked like a different child entirely. The resemblance to Christopher was even more pronounced now, particularly around the eyes and the set of his jaw. Come in, William, Christopher said, gesturing to the chair that had been placed between his own seat and Margaret's. I hope you found everything satisfactory in your chamber. William approached cautiously, as though the chair might be snatched away. Yes, sir. It is very fine. Finer than anything I have known. He sat with exaggerated care, his back straight, hands folded in his lap. Margaret noted how his gaze moved methodically around the room, taking in the painted wallpaper, the sideboards laden with silver, the portrait above the fireplace of Christopher's grandfather in full ducal regalia. Supper was served in courses, each dish presented by footmen who moved with silent efficiency. William watched the process with obvious confusion, uncertain which utensil to use or when to begin eating. Margaret caught his eye and smiled, lifting her fork to indicate he should do the same. He mimicked her movements precisely, his relief at having guidance evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. Do you like to read, William? Claire asked, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. William swallowed his mouthful of roasted chicken before answering. I know my letters, my lady. Mrs. Stevenson taught us at the orphanage. But I have not read many books, only the Bible and some primers. The library here has many books suitable for a boy your age, Christopher said. Adventures, histories, tales of faraway places. You are welcome to borrow any that interest you. Thank you, sir. William's voice remained small, careful. I will be careful not to damage them. Books are meant to be read, not preserved, Christopher replied gently. A few bent pages are a sign of a book well loved. Margaret saw something flicker in William's expression, there and gone too quickly to name. Perhaps surprised that someone would speak of loving objects, of valuing use over preservation. In the orphanage and the Caldwell stables, everything had been functional, nothing cherished. As the meal progressed, William gradually relaxed enough to eat more heartily. Margaret took care not to stare, though she wanted to memorize every gesture, every expression. The way he chewed thoughtfully, the precise manner in which he returned his utensils to his plate, the occasional furtive glances he cast at the adults as though verifying their continued benevolence. When the final course was cleared, Christopher addressed William directly. You must be tired from the journey. Elizabeth will take you back to your room. Tomorrow we will show you more of the house and grounds. For tonight, rest. William stood, offering a bow that was more instinct than training. Good night, sir. My lady. He turned to Claire. My lady. After he departed, the three adults remained at the table, the weight of unsaid things pressing down upon them. He is terrified, Margaret said finally, her voice thick. Terrified that this is temporary, that he will be sent away if he fails to please. Children who have been abandoned learn not to trust promises, Claire observed quietly. He will need time to believe this is real. Christopher pushed his wineglass away, untouched. I sent word to Price before we departed Yorkshire. He is to focus his efforts now on locating the witnesses who can corroborate what Thomas told me 5 years ago. My mother must be confronted with irrefutable proof. She will fight, Margaret said. She will not surrender easily. Let her fight. Christopher's voice hardened. I have spent 5 years searching for my son. I will not allow her to endanger him now that he is under my protection. That night, Margaret found sleep impossible. Near midnight, she rose and wrapped herself in a dressing gown, moving silently through the darkened corridors of Havishire. Her feet carried her without conscious direction to the blue chamber where William slept. She stood outside his door, her hand pressed flat against the wood, imagining she could feel his presence on the other side. Was he sleeping? Or did he lie awake as she did, processing the strangeness of his new circumstances? Did he dream of the orphanage, of the stables, of faces he would never see again? The temptation to open the door, to slip inside and watch him sleep as she had imagined doing 1,000 times over the past 5 years, was nearly overwhelming. But she forced herself to step back, to return to her own chamber. He was not yet ready for such intimacy. She must earn his trust before she could claim the title of mother. In the morning, Margaret found Christopher in his study, several letters spread across his desk. He looked up as she entered. Dark circles beneath his eyes, suggesting he had slept as poorly as she. Price has located Mrs. Dawson, the midwife who attended your confinement, he said without preamble. She fled to Scotland shortly afterward, frightened by whatever threats my mother made. He has also found Jenny, the lady's maid who witnessed my mother removing the baby from the manor. She was sent to Ireland with a payment for her silence. Margaret sank into the chair across from him. Will they testify? Price believes so, now that they understand they have my protection and that my mother's influence has limits. Christopher's expression was grim. I have invited them both to Havishire. They will arrive within the week. And Victoria. I have sent her a letter informing her that William is here, under my guardianship, and that her presence is neither required nor desired. His jaw tightened. She responded this morning. He handed Margaret a single sheet of paper covered in his mother's angular handwriting. The words were brief but venomous, demanding immediate return of the orphan boy, insisting that Christopher was being deceived, threatening legal action and social ruin if he persisted in this folly. She is desperate, Margaret observed, returning the letter. That makes her dangerous. She is also alone, Christopher replied. Her own actions have isolated her. The servants fear her. The family has long since tired of her machinations, and society tolerates her only because of the title she carries. She has no true allies. A knock at the study door interrupted them. Mrs. Hughes entered with an apologetic expression. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but the Dowager Duchess has arrived. She insists on seeing you immediately. Margaret and Christopher exchanged glances. They had expected conflict, but not quite so soon. Show her to the morning room, Christopher said. We will receive her there. Victoria Linden stood before the fireplace when they entered, her posture rigid with barely controlled fury. At 60, she remained an imposing figure, her grey hair dressed severely, her black gown emphasizing the pallor of her complexion. Her brown eyes, cold as winter earth, fixed on Christopher with undisguised hostility. You have exceeded all bounds of reason, she said without greeting or preamble. To bring that child here, to parade him as though he were truly part of this family, it is an insult to the Linden name. That child, Christopher replied, his voice dangerously quiet, is my son, your grandson, and you will address him with the respect he is owed. Victoria's laugh was harsh. Your son? You have allowed sentiment to cloud your judgment, Christopher. The boy is nothing more than an orphan, conveniently matching certain superficial characteristics. You cannot prove any blood relation. Actually, Mother, I can. Christopher moved to stand beside Margaret, a subtle declaration of united front. Dr. Whitmore will examine William this afternoon. There is a birthmark, documented by Mrs. Stevenson at St. Catherine's, that corresponds exactly to the mark I saw on my son moments after his birth. Margaret remembers it as well. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Victoria's face. Birthmarks are not uncommon. This one is quite distinctive, Margaret said, finding her voice. In a location and shape that would be difficult to fabricate or confuse with another child's marking. Victoria's gaze swung to Margaret, contempt evident in every line of her expression. You. This is your doing. You have convinced my son to pursue this delusion because you cannot accept your own failure to produce a living heir. Margaret felt Christopher stiffen beside her, but she raised a hand slightly, silencing whatever sharp retort he had been about to make. When she spoke, her voice was steady and cold. I can accept many things, Your Grace. I have accepted 5 years of grief. I have accepted a marriage strained by secrets. I have even accepted that you deemed me unworthy of your family. She took a step forward. What I will not accept is your continued attempt to deny my son his birthright because of your arrogance and prejudice. Victoria's face flushed with anger. How dare you speak to me in such a manner? You forget yourself, girl. You forget what you owe to this family, to the position you were granted despite your inferior connections. I forget nothing, Margaret replied. Least of all that you stole my child and allowed me to believe him dead. Whatever debt I might have owed the Linden family has been paid in full through 5 years of unnecessary suffering. You have no proof, Victoria insisted, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. You have an orphan boy and wishful thinking. No court would recognize such a claim. Perhaps not, Christopher interjected. But then again, I am not planning to take this matter to court. I am the Duke of Havishire. My word carries considerable weight. If I declare William to be my legitimate son and heir, society will accept it. The law will follow. Victoria's hands clenched at her sides. You would risk everything? Your reputation, your standing, all for this fantasy? I would risk anything for my son, Christopher said simply. As you apparently were willing to do, to prevent him from being raised by the woman you deemed unworthy. The accusation hung in the air between them. Victoria's mask of control cracked further, rage and something that might have been fear warring in her expression. If you proceed with this madness, she said, her voice shaking, I will make certain that everyone knows the truth. That you have adopted a random orphan and are attempting to pass him off as legitimate. The scandal will destroy you. Then we will both be destroyed, Christopher replied. But at least I will have my son. The standoff stretched for a long moment. Then Victoria turned on her heel and swept toward the door, pausing only to deliver a final salvo. You have not heard the last of this, Christopher. Mark my words. The door closed behind her with enough force to rattle the paintings on the walls. Margaret released a breath she had not realized she was holding, her knees suddenly weak. She will not surrender, she said quietly. No, Christopher agreed. But neither will we. That afternoon, Dr. Whitmore arrived to conduct his examination of William. The boy submitted to the process with wary compliance, answering the doctor's gentle questions in monosyllables, flinching slightly when asked to remove his shirt. When the examination concluded, Dr. Whitmore returned to where Margaret and Christopher waited in the corridor outside William's room. The birthmark is present, he said without preamble. Inside of the left wrist, approximately 2 inches long, roughly crescent-shaped. It matches the description in my notes from the birth 5 years ago. He paused. Additionally, the boy's general appearance, bone structure, and colouring are consistent with being the child of your graces. While I cannot offer absolute medical certainty, the evidence is compelling. Margaret felt something release in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since that moment in the library when she first read Price's letter. Proof. They had proof. Thank you, Dr. Whitmore, Christopher said. Your discretion in this matter is appreciated. After the doctor departed, they returned to William's room. He had dressed again and sat on the edge of the large bed, looking small and lost in the spacious chamber. William, Margaret said gently, may we speak with you for a moment? He nodded, his expression guarded. They sat in chairs near the fireplace, positioning themselves so they would not loom over him. Margaret chose her words carefully. You must have many questions about why you are here, she began. About why we brought you specifically from the Caldwell estate. William's gaze moved between them. I wondered, ma'am, but people do not always explain their reasons to boys like me. You are not just any boy, Christopher said, and I think it is time we began to explain, though the full truth is complex and will take time to understand. William waited, his small hands folded tightly in his lap. "Do you remember anything from before the orphanage?" Margaret asked. "Anything at all?" He frowned, thinking. "Only feelings, warm things, soft sounds, nothing clear." "That makes sense," Margaret said. "You were very young, but William, we have reason to believe that you did not simply arrive at the orphanage by chance or because your parents had died." His eyes widened slightly. "Ma'am, we believe," Christopher continued carefully, "that you were taken there by someone who should not have done so. That you have family who have been searching for you for a very long time." William's expression shifted through confusion to something that might have been hope, quickly suppressed. "I do not understand, sir." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "We are going to take time to help you understand. But for now, I want you to know that you are safe here, that you are wanted, and that no matter what happens, you will not be sent away." The boys studied their faces for a long moment, as though trying to determine whether these words could be trusted. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ma'am." "Sir." It was not acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. The witnesses arrived on a grey morning when mist still clung to the grounds of Havisham Manor. Mrs. Dawson came first, a woman of perhaps 50, with tired eyes and hands worn rough from years of attending births in cramped cottages and grand estates alike. She was shown to a guest chamber and given time to rest from her journey before being summoned to the main drawing room where the confrontation would take place. Jenny Michaels arrived several hours later, younger than the midwife by perhaps 15 years, her face marked by the hardness that came from surviving on limited choices. She had been Victoria's lady's maid, privy to secrets meant to remain buried. Price had promised her protection and compensation in exchange for her testimony, and desperation had overcome fear. Christopher arranged the meeting with the precision of a military campaign. The formal drawing room was chosen for its size and grandeur, a space that would remind all present of the power the Duke wielded. Chairs were positioned carefully. Price stood near the door, his presence a silent promise that everything spoken would be documented. Dr. Whitmore sat to one side, his medical authority lending weight to proceedings. Margaret chose her seat deliberately, between Christopher and Claire, creating a wall of solidarity. She wore a gown of deep blue, simple but elegant, her hair dressed severely to emphasize the seriousness of the occasion. Her hands remained steady in her lap, though her heart beat against her ribs like a caged bird. Victoria arrived precisely at the appointed hour, her carriage pulling up before the manor with an air of defiant punctuality. She swept into the drawing room as though she owned it still, her black gown and severe expression suggesting she had come prepared for battle. "I assume this theatre serves some purpose," she said coldly, taking in the assembled company. Her gaze lingered briefly on the two women she did not recognize, then dismissed them as irrelevant. "Please be seated, Mother," Christopher replied, his tone formal. "We have matters to discuss that require your full attention." Victoria remained standing, her posture rigid. "I will not be lectured in what was once my home by a son who has taken leave of his senses." "Then you will stand and listen," Christopher said, steel entering his voice. "Mrs. Dawson, if you would please recount the events of 5 years ago, the night of my son's birth." The midwife rose slowly, her hands twisting together nervously. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, carrying the weight of long-suppressed truth. "I attended Lady Margaret's confinement, Your Grace. The labour was long and difficult, lasting near on 20 hours. But the babe was born alive and well, a healthy boy with good lungs and no signs of distress." She paused, gathering courage. "I wrapped him myself, placed him in the bassinet. He was perfect." Victoria's expression remained impassive, but Margaret noticed the slight tightening around her mouth. "After Lady Margaret fell into exhausted sleep, I was tending to the infant when the Dowager Duchess entered the chamber," Mrs. Dawson continued. "She told me there had been a mistake, that the child had died despite my efforts, and that I was to confirm this to anyone who asked." "That is absurd," Victoria interjected sharply. "The woman is confused or lying for whatever compensation you have offered her." "Let her finish," Christopher said quietly. Mrs. Dawson's hands trembled, but she pressed on. "I protested, Your Grace. I said the child was clearly alive. But the Dowager Duchess, she told me that if I spoke a word of truth, she would see to it that I never attended another birth in England, that my reputation would be destroyed, my livelihood taken. She said accusations would be made, that I would be blamed for deaths that were not my doing. Tears gathered in the midwife's eyes. I have 6 children of my own, Your Grace. I could not risk their futures. So you lied, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the fury building within her. You told me my son was dead when he lived. I am sorry, my lady, Mrs. Dawson whispered. I have carried the shame of it every day since. When Mr. Price found me in Edinburgh and promised protection, I knew I had to speak truth at last, whatever the cost. Victoria laughed, a harsh sound without humour. A convenient conversion of conscience, purchased with linden gold. No magistrate would accept such testimony. Perhaps Mrs. Michaels's account will prove more compelling, Christopher said, nodding to the former lady's maid. Jenny stood, her chin lifted defiantly, though her voice shook. I was there that night, Your Grace. I saw the Dowager take the child from the nursery, wrap him in plain blankets, and carry him to the carriage house. She ordered me to accompany her, said we were taking the babe to people who would care for him properly, people who understood the importance of bloodlines. This is fantasy, Victoria said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Why would I trust a servant with such information? Because you needed someone to help you, and you thought you owned my silence, Jenny replied, anger overtaking fear. You paid me £50 and sent me to Ireland with a letter of reference, told me to stay there until you sent word it was safe to return. That word never came. I grew tired of waiting, Jenny continued. After 5 years, I thought perhaps you had forgotten me entirely. Then Mr. Price found me, told me what you had done, that the child lived and the Duke was searching for him. I realized then that you never meant for me to return. You would have left me in exile forever to protect your secret. Victoria's mask began to crack, fury replacing her calculated disdain. You were well compensated for your discretion. If you chose to remain in Ireland, that was your decision. Where did you take my son? Margaret asked, rising to her feet. The room fell silent as all attention focused on her. Where did you take him that night, Victoria? The Dowager Duchess's jaw clenched. I took no one anywhere. These women are liars, paid to create a fiction that appeals to your desperate need to believe your failure was not your own. There is a boy upstairs in this house, Christopher said, his voice dangerously quiet. A boy with my eyes, Margaret's colouring, and a distinctive birthmark that Dr. Whitmore documented moments after his birth. A boy who arrived at St. Catherine's orphanage as an infant, brought by an unnamed woman of quality who paid for his care and demanded no questions be asked. A boy who matches in every particular the son we were told had died. Coincidence, Victoria insisted, but the word sounded hollow even to her. Christopher produced a document from the table beside him. This is the record from St. Catherine's, detailing the night of the boy's arrival. The date corresponds exactly to 3 days after my son's alleged death. The description of the woman who brought him matches you in height, bearing, and the quality of her clothing. The carriage she arrived in bore no crest, but the horses were of exceptional breeding, noted by the orphanage's stable hand, because such animals were unusual in that part of Yorkshire. Victoria's face had gone pale. You have proved nothing. A child who resembles you, some orphanage records, and the paid testimony of 2 women who have every reason to lie. No court would convict on such evidence. I am not seeking conviction, Christopher replied. I am seeking confession. And if you will not provide it willingly, I will present this evidence to every member of the family, every friend, every social connection we possess. Your reputation will be destroyed, Mother, not by legal judgment, but by the court of society. You will spend your remaining years shunned and despised, known as the woman who stole her own grandchild. For a long moment, Victoria stood silent, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles showed white against the black silk of her gloves. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and venomous. She was unworthy, Victoria said, her gaze fixed on Margaret with undisguised contempt. a viscount's daughter with barely enough dowry to furnish a townhouse. You deserved better, Christopher. The Linden lineage deserved better. I thought if the child were removed, if she were shown to be barren or at least incapable of producing a surviving heir, you would see reason. You would seek an annulment and marry appropriately. Margaret felt as though she had been struck. The casual cruelty of it, the cold calculation behind the theft of her child, stole her breath. So you admit it, Christopher said. You took my son and abandoned him to an orphanage to force me to dissolve my marriage. I secured his future, Victoria countered, her voice rising. Do you think some merchant's family or farmer's household would not have provided adequately? He would have been fed, clothed, given work. He would have survived, which is more than many base-born children can claim. He is not base-born, Margaret said, finding her voice at last. He is the legitimate son of the Duke of Havishire, stolen by his own grandmother and condemned to 5 years of institutional neglect and servitude. You speak of his future as though you secured anything beyond your own twisted satisfaction. Victoria's mask shattered completely. You dare speak to me of satisfaction? You, who brought nothing to this family but mediocrity and disappointment. I have spent decades maintaining the Linden reputation, ensuring our place among the highest ranks of society, and you would have diluted that with your common blood. Common blood, Margaret repeated, her voice shaking with rage. My son has that common blood, Victoria, every drop, and he will inherit everything you sought to deny him, not despite his mother's origins, but because his father loves him and his mother never stopped grieving for him. Christopher rose, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. You will leave Havishire, mother. Today, you will remove yourself to the dower house on the northern estate, where you will remain. Your allowance will be maintained at a level sufficient for basic comfort, nothing more. You will have no contact with William, no influence over his upbringing, and no voice in family matters. If you attempt to interfere, if you breathe one word of scandal or slander, I will cut you off entirely and make public every detail of what you have done. Victoria's face contorted with fury. You would cast out your own mother for a woman you married out of obligation and a child who may not even be yours. He is mine, Christopher said with absolute certainty, and I will protect him from you, as I should have done 5 years ago. Your presence in his life is poison, mother. I will not allow you to damage him as you have damaged so much else. For a moment, Margaret thought Victoria might physically strike Christopher. Then something in her seemed to collapse inward, fury giving way to a bitter, twisted acceptance of defeat. You will regret this, she said, her voice cold as winter earth. When that boy proves to be everything common and disappointing that his mother brought to this family, you will remember that I tried to save you from this mistake. The only mistake I made was not recognizing your capacity for cruelty sooner, Christopher replied. Now leave. I do not wish to see you again unless absolutely necessary. Victoria swept from the room, her spine rigid with barely contained rage. The sound of her carriage departing echoed through the manor like a final punctuation to years of control and manipulation. In the silence that followed, Margaret sank back into her chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Mrs. Dawson and Jenny both looked relieved and frightened in equal measure, uncertain what their testimony had cost them. You are both under my protection, Christopher assured them. Mrs. Dawson, I have arranged for a cottage on the estate where you may live comfortably. Your midwifery skills will be welcomed among the tenants if you choose to continue your work. Mrs. Michaels, you will have a position in the household if you desire it, or a sum sufficient to establish yourself elsewhere. The choice is yours. Both women expressed tearful gratitude, then were escorted from the room by Mrs. Hughes, leaving only Christopher, Margaret, Claire, and Price. It is done, Price said quietly. The Dowager Duchess's confession, though not given under oath, was witnessed by 6 people. Combined with the physical evidence of the boy's birthmark and the documented timeline, your claim is secure, Your Grace. Thank you, Mr. Price, Christopher replied. Your services have been invaluable. After Price departed, Claire moved to Margaret's side, her hand resting gently on her friend's shoulder. Are you well? Margaret shook her head slowly. I am not certain I know what wealth feels like anymore. To hear her speak of it so callously, as though William were an inconvenience to be managed rather than a child to be cherished. Her voice broke. Christopher knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. She cannot hurt him now. She cannot hurt any of us. William is home, Margaret. We have won. Have we? Margaret asked, tears finally spilling over. We have defeated Victoria, yes. But William does not know us. He does not trust us. He has spent 5 years learning that people are unreliable and that safety is temporary. How do we undo that damage? How do we teach him that this home is permanent? That we are his parents, not just in blood, but in truth? One day at a time, Christopher said gently, with patience and love and time. We cannot restore what was stolen, but we can build something new, something stronger for having been fought for. Margaret looked into her husband's blue eyes, so like their son's, and saw reflected there the same determination that had driven him through 5 years of searching. Whatever distance had grown between them during those years, whatever hurt the deception had caused, they were united now in purpose. Then we begin today, she said, wiping her tears away. We begin teaching him that he belongs here, that he is wanted, that he is loved, no matter how long it takes. Upstairs in his chamber, William sat by the window, watching the comings and goings below with cautious interest. He had heard raised voices earlier, though not the words themselves, and had seen the forbidding woman in black depart in obvious anger. He did not understand what any of it meant, but he recognized the aftermath of conflict when he saw it. The Duke and Duchess had been kind to him, kinder than anyone in his memory. But kindness, William had learned, was often temporary. People were kind when it served their purposes, and those purposes could change without warning. Still, as he watched the afternoon light slant across the grounds, touching the gardens and distant woods with gold, William allowed himself a small, fragile hope. Perhaps this place, these people, might be different. Perhaps for the first time in his short life, he might be allowed to stay. It was a dangerous hope, one that could be crushed as easily as it had formed, but it was hope nonetheless, and that was more than he had possessed in a very long time. With Victoria neutralized and the immediate crisis resolved, attention shifted entirely to William. The days following the confrontation established a careful rhythm designed to help him acclimate without overwhelming him. Margaret and Christopher consulted with Dr. Whitmore extensively about the best approach for revealing the full truth to a child who had spent 5 years without family or security. He must not feel deceived, Dr. Whitmore cautioned during one such consultation. Children who have been abandoned develop acute sensitivity to dishonesty. If you present this information too abruptly, or in a manner that seems calculated, he may reject it entirely as another manipulation by adults who see him as a pawn rather than a person. Then how do we proceed? Margaret asked, frustration edging into her voice. Every moment spent not claiming William as her son felt like a continuation of the separation forced upon them 5 years ago. Gradually, the doctor replied. Let him become comfortable in this house first. Let him begin to trust that meals will arrive regularly, that his chamber will not be taken away, that kindness is not contingent upon perfect behavior. Once that foundation is established, you can begin introducing the deeper truths. And so they proceeded with deliberate patience that tested Margaret's resolve daily. Christopher began spending an hour each morning with William in the library, ostensibly teaching him the basics of estate management and arithmetic, but really just allowing the boy to grow accustomed to his presence. They would sit together at the large desk, Christopher explaining ledgers and maps, while William listened with the intense focus of someone memorizing information for survival. You are very quick with numbers, Christopher observed one morning, as William correctly calculated the yield from a particular tenant farm. Have you always had a facility for such things? William's shoulders lifted in a slight shrug. A gesture Margaret had learned meant he was uncertain how to answer without giving offence. Mrs. Stevenson taught us to count and cipher at the orphanage. She said it would help us find work when we left. It is a useful skill, Christopher agreed. But here, you need not worry about finding work. Your purpose is to learn and grow, nothing more. The boy's blue eyes, so like his father's, studied Christopher's face as though trying to determine if such a promise could be trusted. "Everyone must be useful, sir. That is what I have always been told." "You are useful simply by being yourself, William," Christopher said gently. "Your value does not lie in what labor you can provide." It was clear from William's expression that this concept was entirely foreign to him. In his experience, children without families existed only as assets or burdens, their worth measured in the work they could perform or the space they occupied. The idea that he might simply exist, without justification, without earning his place through service, was incomprehensible. Margaret's approach was different, but equally careful. She involved William in small domestic activities, inviting him to help select flowers from the conservatory for the dining table, or to accompany her on short walks through the gardens. She spoke to him as she would to any child, asking his opinions on trivial matters and treating his answers with genuine interest. "Do you prefer the white roses or the pink?" she asked one afternoon, as they stood before the rose garden in full bloom. William examined both varieties seriously before responding. "The white ones smell sweeter, my lady, but the pink ones are prettier to look at." "Then we shall take both," Margaret decided, "beauty and fragrance together." She handed him the basket to carry, noting how carefully he held it, as though afraid of damaging something precious. As they walked back toward the manor, Margaret ventured into more personal territory. "William, do you remember anything from when you were very small, before the orphanage?" The boy's forehead creased in concentration. "Not proper memories, my lady. Sometimes I dream of being warm and hearing a woman's voice singing, but I do not know if it is real or just something I imagined." Margaret's throat tightened. "What did the voice sing?" "I cannot recall the words, just the sound of it, soft and sad." He glanced up at her. "Why do you ask, my lady?" "Because I wonder if perhaps those dreams are memories," Margaret replied carefully. "If perhaps the woman singing was someone who loved you very much." William considered this, his young face grave. "If she loved me, why did she give me away?" The question, asked with such simple directness, nearly broke Margaret's composure. Sometimes people are separated, not because they choose to be, but because circumstances beyond their control intervene. Sometimes children are taken from parents who would have kept them close if they could. "Is that what happened to me?" William asked, stopping on the path to look at her fully. Margaret knelt, so they were at eye level, the basket of roses between them. "I believe it is, yes. And I believe the people who loved you have been searching for you for a very long time." William's expression shifted through several emotions too quick to name. Hope warred with fear, longing with suspicion. "Are you saying, are you and the Duke?" "I am saying," Margaret said gently, "that you are not here by accident, William. You are here because you belong here, because this is where you were always meant to be." She did not say more. Not yet. Dr. Whitmore had warned against overwhelming him, but she could see the questions forming behind his eyes, the tentative willingness to believe battling against years of learned caution. That evening, the three of them dined together in the small family dining room rather than the formal hall. It had become their custom, these quiet meals, where conversation flowed more easily in the intimate space. Claire often joined them, her presence helping to ease any tension that arose. "I received a letter from my sister today," Claire mentioned as the soup course was served. "She asks after you, Margaret, and wonders when she might visit to meet young William." "Lady Hartley has 3 children of her own," Margaret explained to William. "2 boys near your age and a girl slightly older. Perhaps you would enjoy meeting them." William's expression suggested this prospect was both intriguing and terrifying. "Would I have to know special manners for meeting them, my lady?" "Only the same manners you already demonstrate," Margaret assured him, "which are quite good. Simply be yourself, William. That is always sufficient." "At the orphanage we had to bow to visitors and keep our eyes down," William said. "And at Mr. Caldwell's we were not to speak unless spoken to directly." "Those rules do not apply here," Christopher said firmly. "You are not a servant in this house, William. You are—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You are family, and family members treat one another with respect, but also with ease. You may speak freely, express your thoughts, even disagree if you have reason to, William absorbed this information with the same serious attention he gave to everything, filing it away in whatever internal catalogue he maintained of this strange new world's rules. After dinner, Christopher invited William to join him in the study for a brief lesson in chess. Margaret watched them go, their similar heights and builds apparent when they walked side by side, and felt her heart constrict with tangled emotions. "He is beginning to trust," Claire observed quietly, coming to stand beside Margaret in the doorway. "I can see it in the way he moves through the house now, less like someone expecting to be sent away at any moment. But he does not yet understand who we truly are to him," Margaret replied. "He knows we are kind. He suspects we have some particular interest in him. But the full truth will come," Claire assured her. "And when it does, he will be ready to hear it, because you will have earned the right to tell him. Patience, Margaret. You are doing everything correctly." Over the following days, Christopher gradually increased the amount of time he spent with William, teaching him to ride properly on one of the gentler mares from the Havishire stables. William proved a natural horseman, his time at the Caldwell estate having given him a foundation of knowledge about equine behaviour. "You sit well," Christopher praised as they walked the horses through the estate's riding paths. "Better than many boys twice your age who have had formal instruction. The horses at Mr. Caldwell's taught me to pay attention," William replied. "If you did not notice when they were nervous or uncomfortable, you might get kicked or bitten." "That is true wisdom," Christopher acknowledged. "Horses are honest creatures. They show you plainly what they feel and expect you to respond accordingly, unlike people who often hide their true feelings behind pleasant faces." William glanced at him sideways. "Do you hide your feelings, sir?" The question caught Christopher off guard with its directness. He considered his response carefully. "Sometimes, yes, when I believe showing them would cause harm or confusion. But I try not to hide them from the people who matter most to me." "Who are the people who matter most?" William asked. "My wife," Christopher said, "Lady Hartley, who has been a loyal friend. And you, William. You matter very much to me." The boy's hands tightened on the reins, though the mare continued her steady walk. "Why, sir, you hardly know me." "I know more than you might think," Christopher replied. "I know you are resilient and intelligent. I know you treat animals with kindness. I know you have survived circumstances that would have broken many children. And I know—" He paused, then decided to venture further than Dr. Whitmore might have advised. "I know that you are the child I have been searching for since you were taken from me 5 years ago." William went very still, his face pale beneath its light tan. "Sir?" Christopher brought his horse to a halt and dismounted, then helped William down as well. They stood together in a clearing where wildflowers grew between the trees, and Christopher knelt so they were at eye level. "The mark on your wrist," he said gently. "I saw it the night you were born. I memorized every detail of your face in those brief moments before you were taken away, and I was told you had died. I have spent 5 years following every possible lead, investigating every orphanage, searching for any trace of you. When Mr. Price sent word that a boy matching your description had been found, I barely allowed myself to hope. But the moment I saw you at the Caldwell estate, I knew. You are my son, William. Mine and Lady Margaret's. Your presence here is not charity or kindness. It is a father reclaiming his child." William stared at him, chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes wide with shock. But I was told my parents were dead, or that they did not want me. Mrs. Stevenson said. "Mrs. Stevenson told you what she believed to be true," Christopher said. "But she was deceived, as we all were. Someone took you from us and made it appear you had died. That someone has now been found out and removed from our lives. You are safe now, William. You are home." The boy's face crumpled, tears spilling over despite his obvious attempt to contain them. "I do not understand. Why would anyone do such a thing? Why would they take me away?" "Because she believed your mother was not good enough for our family," Christopher said, his voice roughening with emotion. "Because she valued bloodlines and social position more than love and family. But she was wrong, William. So terribly wrong. Your mother is the strongest, most compassionate woman I have ever known, and you are the son we both thought we had lost forever." William's small frame shook with sobs he could no longer suppress. Christopher gathered him into his arms, holding him as he wept. 5 years of grief and confusion pouring out in great shuddering gasps. "It is all right," Christopher murmured. "You are safe. You are loved. I promise you, William, I will never let anyone take you from us again." When the storm of weeping finally subsided, William pulled back slightly, wiping his face with his sleeve. Does Lady Margaret know that I am her son?" "She has known since the day we brought you home," Christopher replied. "She has been the one advocating for patience, for telling you gently so you would not be frightened or overwhelmed. Every kind word, every gentle gesture has been from a mother who loves her child desperately." William's expression shifted through several emotions. She did not seem like she was pretending. She seemed like she truly cared. "Because she does truly care," Christopher said. "She is your mother, William, not just in blood, but in her heart. She has grieved for you every day since you were taken. And now that you are here, all she wants is to help you heal and grow into the person you were meant to become." They sat together in the clearing for some time, William processing this monumental revelation while Christopher remained close, offering silent support. Finally, the boy spoke again, his voice small. "What do I call you? If you are my father, do I still say sir? Or your grace?" Christopher felt his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "You may call me whatever feels right to you, William. If sir is most comfortable, that is acceptable. If you wish to try father, I would be honored. There is no requirement, no expectation, only whatever comes naturally in time." William nodded slowly. "And Lady Margaret?" "The same applies. She is your mother, but she does not require you to call her so until you are ready." Christopher paused. "Shall we return to the manor? I believe she will be anxious to know how you have received this news." They remounted and rode back slowly. William lost in thought while Christopher gave him space to process. When they entered the stables, Margaret was there, ostensibly checking on one of the horses, but clearly waiting for them. Her eyes met Christopher's over William's head, asking the silent question. He nodded slightly, confirming that the truth had been told. William approached her slowly, his expression uncertain. Then, with the simple directness that characterized his nature, he asked, "Are you truly my mother, my lady?" Margaret knelt, bringing herself to his level. "I am," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have been your mother since the day you were born, William, and I will be your mother until the day I die. Nothing will ever change that." William studied her face for a long moment, then asked the question that clearly mattered most to him. "Will you send me away again, if I am not good enough, or if I do something wrong?" "Never," Margaret said fiercely. "I did not send you away the first time, William. You were stolen from me. And now that you are back, I will move heaven and earth before I allow anyone to separate us again. You are my son. You are home. And this time, nothing will change that." Tentatively, testing the waters of this new reality, William reached out and touched her face gently, as though confirming she was real. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke the word he had not used in 5 years. "Mother." Margaret pulled him into her arms, tears streaming down her face as she held her son for the first time since he was an infant. Christopher joined them, his arms encircling them both, and for several long minutes, the three of them simply existed together, a family reunited after years of forced separation. In the stables around them, horses shifted in their stalls, and grooms moved about their work. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was this moment, this reunion, this beginning of healing. William was home. The weeks following William's acceptance of his true identity brought changes both profound and subtle to Havishire Manor. The formal distance that had characterized the household began to dissolve, replaced by something warmer, more alive. William still tested boundaries with the caution of a child who had learned not to trust permanence, but each day brought small victories, moments when his careful guard slipped to reveal the boy beneath the survival instincts. He began calling Margaret mother with increasing frequency, though the words still came tentatively, as though he expected to be corrected. Christopher he addressed as father only in private moments, reserving Sir for public interactions, a compromise that honoured both their relationship and William's need to proceed at his own pace. The household staff, who had initially been puzzled by the Duke's sudden acquisition of a page who was housed in the family wing and treated with unusual deference, quickly understood the situation. Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, took particular interest in William's welfare, ensuring his rooms were always warm and that his favourite foods appeared regularly at meals. "The young master asked for apple tart yesterday," she informed Margaret one morning. "I have instructed cook to prepare it twice weekly." "Thank you, Mrs. Hughes," Margaret replied, touched by the woman's consideration. "He is still learning that expressing preferences is permitted." "He will learn, Your Grace," Mrs. Hughes said with quiet confidence. "Children are resilient creatures. Given time and love, they bloom like flowers after a hard frost." Margaret found herself crying at odd moments during those weeks, overcome by emotions she had kept carefully controlled for 5 years. The sight of William reading in the library, his face absorbed in a book of adventure tales. The sound of his laughter when Christopher taught him to fish in the estate's stream. The feel of his hand in hers as they walked through the gardens. Each moment was both gift and reminder of all the moments that had been stolen. Christopher, too, was changed. The driven intensity that had characterized him during the years of searching had softened into something gentler. He smiled more readily, laughed at William's earnest observations, and spent hours simply being present rather than productive. The marriage that had been strained nearly to breaking by secrets and grief began, slowly, to mend. One evening, after William had retired to his chamber, Christopher found Margaret in the small sitting room she favoured, gazing into the fire. "You have been quiet tonight," he observed, settling into the chair beside hers. "Are you well?" Margaret turned to him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I was thinking about all the years we have lost. Not just with William, but with each other. We have been husband and wife for 6 years, Christopher. But we have been strangers for most of that time." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I know I have asked you to forgive the deception, but I have not asked you to forgive the distance I maintained long before William was taken. I married you to satisfy duty and save your family from ruin, but I did not give you the partnership you deserved. We both brought grief into this marriage," Margaret said quietly. "You were still mourning what you believed your former fiancé's betrayal had stolen from you. I was desperate and grateful for rescue, but not prepared to truly be a wife. We were two people occupying the same space, performing roles rather than building something real. Do you think," Christopher asked carefully, "that we might begin again? Not as Duke and Duchess performing for society, but as two people choosing to build a life together." Margaret looked at him fully, seeing not the distant figure who had once seemed carved from ice, but the man who had searched tirelessly for their son, who had defied his mother's cruelty, who held William with such tenderness. "I would like that very much, Yitam." The kiss they shared was tentative at first, testing waters long left still, then deepened into something that spoke of new beginnings rather than obligations. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless. "Perhaps," Christopher said, a hint of humour in his voice, "we might consider consummating this new understanding of our marriage properly, rather than maintaining the separate chambers we have occupied for 6 years. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she smiled. "That seems a reasonable suggestion, Your Grace." "Christopher," he corrected gently. "When we are private, I am simply Christopher, your husband, not your Duke." "Christopher," she repeated, tasting the intimacy of his given name on her tongue. "Yes, I would like that very much." The physical reconciliation of their marriage brought with it an emotional intimacy that had been absent before. They talked long into the nights about everything and nothing, sharing fears and hopes and memories that had previously remained locked away. Margaret spoke of her childhood as the overlooked middle daughter of an impoverished earl, always aware she was valued primarily for whatever marriage alliance she might secure. Christopher confessed his lingering guilt over not protecting William from Victoria's machinations. His fear that he had failed as both husband and father. "You did not fail," Margaret insisted as they lay together in his chamber one night, her head resting on his chest. "You were deceived by someone you had every reason to trust. The failure was Victoria's, not yours." "But I should have questioned," Christopher replied, his fingers combing idly through her hair. "When you fell into such deep grief, when the signs did not quite align with what I had been told, I should have investigated immediately rather than waiting 3 days. And I should have insisted on seeing the body," Margaret countered. "We can torment ourselves with should-haves endlessly, or we can accept that we were victims of a cruel deception and focus on the years ahead rather than those behind us." As autumn deepened toward winter, Claire helped Margaret plan a small gathering to formally introduce William to their closest circle of friends and family. The story would be carefully curated, presenting William's return as the fortunate resolution of a tragic mistake rather than deliberate theft. Victoria's role would be minimized to protect William from the full weight of his grandmother's betrayal. "Society will gossip regardless," Claire warned as they reviewed the guest list. "Better to control the narrative from the start than allow wild speculation to flourish." "I care less about society's opinion than I once did," Margaret admitted. "But you are right that we must think of William's future. He will inherit the dukedom one day. His legitimacy must be beyond question." The gathering was held on a crisp November evening when the first frost had touched the gardens and fires blazed in every hearth. Perhaps 20 guests assembled in the drawing room, including Claire's sister with her 3 children, several neighbouring families of good standing, and Christopher's uncle, the Earl of Pemberton, who served as head of the extended Linden family in the absence of the Dowager Duchess. William, dressed in new clothing that had been tailored specifically for him, stood beside Margaret as guests arrived, shaking hands and accepting greetings with the careful politeness he had learned. Margaret felt his tension in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hand occasionally sought hers for reassurance. "You are doing wonderfully," she murmured during a brief lull. "Just be yourself, William. That is all anyone expects." "But what if they ask questions I do not know how to answer?" he whispered back. "About where I was, or why I did not know you before. Then you say that the circumstances were complicated, and that you are simply glad to be home now," Margaret replied. "The truth does not always require extensive explanation, my dear." Lord Pemberton, a jovial man in his 60s with Christopher's blue eyes but a much rounder figure, approached with genuine warmth. "So this is the young heir everyone is speaking of. Welcome home, lad. You favour your father remarkably." "Thank you, my lord," William replied, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I understand you have spent time in Yorkshire," Pemberton continued conversationally. "Hardy folk up there. I have estates near Leeds myself. Good country for raising sheep and stalwart sons." The conversation flowed more easily after that, with guests treating William not as a curiosity, but as a child returned to his rightful place. Claire's niece and nephews were particularly helpful, drawing William into their games and treating him as simply another boy, rather than the subject of an extraordinary situation. By the evening's end, when the last guest had departed and William had been sent to bed, Margaret felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The social hurdle had been navigated successfully. William's place in their world had been acknowledged and accepted. "He handled it well," Christopher observed as they prepared for bed in what was now their shared chamber. "Better than I might have at his age in similar circumstances." "He has learned to adapt to survive," Margaret replied, settling beside him. "Now we must teach him that he no longer needs to merely survive, that he can live fully, secure in the knowledge that he belongs." In the following days, Margaret made a pilgrimage she had been postponing since William's return. She walked alone to the small cemetery at the edge of the estate where the Linden family had been buried for generations. There, beneath an ancient oak, stood a marble headstone marking a grave that held nothing. "William Linden," it read, "beloved son. Taken too soon." Margaret knelt in the frost-touched grass and traced the letters with her fingers. "He is home," she said quietly to the empty earth beneath. "Our son is alive and well and home. I thought you should know, though there is nothing here to tell. She placed a spray of late-blooming roses at the base of the stone, then rose and walked back toward the manor without looking back. That chapter was closed. The grief that had defined 5 years of her life was transforming into something new, into joy that William lived and future that stretched ahead of them all. A letter arrived that afternoon from Victoria. Christopher read it first, his expression darkening, then passed it to Margaret without comment. The Dowager Duchess's words dripped with venom, threatening legal action, suggesting that William was an imposter, predicting that the boy's common blood would eventually reveal itself in shameful ways. It was the final thrashing of a defeated woman, Margaret realized, dangerous only if given weight. She has no power here, Margaret said, returning the letter to Christopher. And William need never see this. Agreed, Christopher replied, tossing the letter into the fire where it curled and blackened, its poison consumed by flame. My mother will spend the remainder of her days in isolation of her own making. We will not allow her to cast shadows over William's future. That evening, the three of them dined together as had become their custom. William spoke animatedly about the book he was reading, an adventure tale involving pirates and tropical islands. His vocabulary was expanding daily, his confidence growing with each passing week. He still had moments of withdrawal, times when the years of deprivation showed in his caution or his hoarding of small treasures. But those moments grew less frequent. After dinner, as Margaret tucked him into bed, a ritual she treasured beyond measure, William asked a question that had clearly been troubling him. Mother, will I always remember the orphanage? And the stables? Will those memories fade? Margaret considered her answer carefully. I think they will always be part of you, William. But they will become smaller as new, happier memories fill your mind. The difficult times will not vanish, but they will be balanced by years of love and security. And perhaps someday you will look back on those hard times and realize they taught you valuable lessons about resilience and compassion. I do not want to forget entirely, William said. The other boys at St. Catherine's, they are still there. And I was not the only one at Mr. Caldwell's who was treated unkindly. If I forget, it feels like saying they do not matter. Margaret's heart swelled with pride at her son's empathy. Then we will make certain you never forget, and perhaps, when you are older, you will find ways to help children in similar situations, to make their lives better as yours has been made better. I would like that, William said sleepily, to help others like me. Then we will help you do so, Margaret promised, kissing his forehead. Sleep now, my darling boy. Tomorrow we will ride to the village and you can meet the tenants' children. Father thinks you will enjoy learning about managing an estate. Mother. William's voice stopped her at the door. I am glad I am here, with you and Father. I am glad I came home. So are we, William, Margaret replied, her voice thick with emotion. So very, very glad. She closed the door softly and stood in the corridor for a moment, composing herself. Christopher emerged from his study and found her there, understanding without words what had moved her so deeply. He is ours now, Christopher said quietly. Truly ours. Not just in blood or law, but in heart. Yes, Margaret agreed, taking his hand. And we are his. A family not broken after all, but made whole. Together they walked toward their chamber, leaving behind the ghosts of grief and separation, stepping forward into a future they would build together with patience, love, and the second chance they had fought so hard to claim. 6 months passed in a rhythm of healing and discovery. Spring arrived at Havisham Manor with an explosion of colour in the gardens, daffodils and tulips emerging from earth that had seemed dead only weeks before. William, now 6 years old, had grown taller and filled out with proper nutrition and care. The wariness that had characterized his early weeks had softened into something closer to the natural confidence of a child who knew himself loved and secure. The changes in Margaret were equally pronounced, though of a different nature entirely. Her pregnancy had been confirmed by Dr. Whitmore in late winter, and she now carried the visible evidence of it, her abdomen rounded beneath the flowing gowns she favoured. Unlike her first confinement, this pregnancy was surrounded by joy rather than trepidation, by Christopher's constant presence rather than his mother's cold oversight. "How are you feeling this morning?" Christopher asked as they breakfasted together in the sunny morning room. William sat between them, working his way through a substantial plate of eggs and toast with the appetite of a growing boy. "Well enough," Margaret replied, one hand resting unconsciously on her belly. "Though this child seems determined to make its presence known at all hours. I was awakened twice last night by vigorous kicking." William looked up with interest. "Does it hurt when the baby kicks?" "Not precisely hurt," Margaret explained. "More like a strange pressure from within. Would you like to feel?" William nodded eagerly, setting down his fork. Margaret guided his small hand to the side of her abdomen, where the baby seemed most active. They waited several moments. Then the child obliged with a strong kick directly against William's palm. His eyes widened with wonder. "I felt it! The baby moved against my hand." "Your brother or sister saying hello," Christopher said with a smile. "You will make an excellent older brother, William." The boy's expression turned thoughtful. "Will the baby know me? Will it understand that we are family even though we did not grow up together?" "The baby will know you from the beginning," Margaret assured him. "You will be there when it is born, one of the first faces it sees. You will have the advantage of 6 years of wisdom to share, stories to tell, and example to set." "I want to be a good brother," William said seriously. "The kind who protects and teaches and does not let anyone take the baby away." Christopher and Margaret exchanged glances over his head, understanding the deeper meaning behind those words. William's experience had taught him about loss and separation in ways no child should have to learn. Now he was determined to ensure his sibling never knew such pain. "You will be exactly the brother this child needs," Christopher said firmly. "I have no doubt of that." Life at Havisham had settled into comfortable patterns. Christopher had reduced his travels significantly, conducting most business from the estate and delegating tasks he once would have handled personally. His priorities had shifted from maintaining social position and expanding the family's wealth to simply being present for the family itself. William's education progressed under the guidance of a tutor Christopher had engaged, a patient man named Mr. Ellis, who recognized the boy's quick mind and adapted his teaching accordingly. William proved particularly adept at mathematics and history, less enthusiastic about Latin and Greek, though he applied himself diligently to all subjects. "He is bright," Mr. Ellis reported during one of his regular consultations with Christopher and Margaret. "More than that, he is curious. He asks questions that go beyond memorization to genuine understanding. With proper guidance, he could attend Cambridge or Oxford when the time comes." "We are in no hurry," Margaret said. "He has years yet before university need be considered. For now, I simply want him to enjoy learning rather than seeing it as obligation." In April, Claire visited with news that sent a chill through the household despite the warmth of spring sunshine. "I thought you should know before hearing it through gossip channels," she said, settling into the drawing room with Margaret, while William played with Claire's youngest nephew in the garden. "Victoria has died." Margaret absorbed this information with complicated emotions. "When? How?" 3 days ago. An apoplexy, according to her physician. She was found in her chamber at the Dower House, already gone. There was a letter on her desk, addressed to Christopher but unsent. Claire paused. "The Earl of Pemberton handled the arrangements. The funeral was yesterday, very small. He asked me to convey the information to you both. How do you feel about this?" Margaret asked Christopher when Claire had departed and they sat together in his study. "She was your mother, however damaged the relationship became." Christopher stared at the sealed letter Pemberton had forwarded, Victoria's final words written in her distinctive angular hand. "I feel sorrow for what she might have been, had she not allowed pride and prejudice to poison her heart. But I cannot mourn the woman she chose to become, or pretend her absence is a loss." He broke the seal and read silently, his expression remaining neutral. When he finished, he handed the letter to Margaret. Victoria's final words contained no apology, no softening of her position. She maintained to the end that she had acted to protect the family legacy, that Margaret had been unworthy, that William's common blood would eventually reveal itself in shameful ways. The only concession to emotion came in the final lines, where she expressed regret, not for her actions, but for Christopher's rejection of her guidance. She died as she lived, Margaret observed, returning the letter. Convinced of her own righteousness. Yes, Christopher agreed. Which is perhaps the saddest epitaph one could have. Shall we tell William? They decided together that William should know of his grandmother's death, but need not know the full extent of her role in his kidnapping until he was older and better equipped to process such information. When they gathered him that evening and explained gently that Christopher's mother had passed away, William received the news with the careful neutrality of a child uncertain how to respond. "Should I be sad?" he asked. "I know she was family, but I did not know her. And from what the servants whispered when they thought I could not hear, she was not a kind person." "You need not feel any particular way," Margaret replied. "Grief is not obligatory, William. It is natural to feel nothing for someone you did not know, even if they were related by blood." "Did you know her?" William asked Christopher. "I did," Christopher acknowledged. "She was my mother, and there were times when I loved her. But she made choices I cannot defend or forgive. I am sad for the relationship we might have had, but not for the one we actually had. Does that make sense?" William nodded slowly. "Like how I sometimes think about what the orphanage could have been if people had been kinder. But I am not sad about how it actually was because that would not change anything." "Precisely," Christopher said, impressed as always by his son's insight. The incident provided an unexpected opportunity for healing. In dealing with Victoria's death and estate, Christopher was forced to confront many of the feelings he had buried during the years of searching for William. Margaret helped him sort through them, offering comfort when grief surprised him and understanding when anger surfaced. "She stole so much from us," Christopher said one night as they lay together in darkness. "Not just William's first 5 years, but our chance to build a marriage from the beginning. Our ability to parent him from infancy. The innocence he lost because of her cruelty." "She did," Margaret agreed. "But she did not destroy us, Christopher. We survived her machinations. We found William. We have built something real from the ruins she tried to create. That is victory, however painful." As Margaret's pregnancy advanced into its final months, the household prepared for the arrival of the new baby. A nursery was readied, a wet nurse engaged, and Dr. Whitmore placed on notice that he might be summoned at any hour. William took particular interest in the preparations, offering opinions on everything from which cradle should be used to what colour the nursery curtains should be. "I think yellow," he announced one afternoon, as he helped Margaret fold tiny garments. "Yellow is cheerful. Babies should be surrounded by cheerful things. Yellow it shall be," Margaret agreed, charmed by his earnestness. "You will be a wonderful help when the baby arrives, William. I will need someone to hold items while I change and dress the little one. Someone to sing songs when I'm too tired. Someone to tell stories." "I can do all those things," William promised. "And I can teach the baby important things, like how to tell if a horse is friendly, and which berries are safe to eat, and how to skip stones on the pond." "All essential skills," Margaret said solemnly, though her eyes danced with amusement. In late May, when the roses bloomed in profusion and the air was thick with their perfume, Margaret's labour began. Unlike the first time, when she had been isolated and afraid, surrounded only by Victoria's cold presence and servants who followed the Dowager's orders, this confinement was filled with support. Christopher remained nearby throughout, defying convention to be available if Margaret needed him. Claire arrived to provide companionship and practical assistance. Even William, though not permitted in the birthing chamber itself, waited anxiously in the corridor, pacing in unconscious imitation of his father. The labour progressed more quickly than Margaret's first, perhaps because her body remembered the process, perhaps because fear did not complicate the physical challenge. When Dr. Whitmore finally emerged to announce the birth of a healthy daughter, Christopher swept him into an embrace that made the dignified physician sputter with surprise. "Mother and child are both well," Whitmore confirmed. "You may see them shortly, Your Grace." William, who had dozed off in a chair during the final hours of waiting, woke at the commotion. "Is the baby here? Is Mother well?" "Both are perfectly fine," Christopher assured him. "You have a sister, William, and your mother is asking for you." Inside the chamber, Margaret lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with perspiration, but her face radiant. In her arms rested a small bundle wrapped in soft white linen. William approached cautiously, his eyes wide. "Come closer," Margaret invited. "Come meet your sister." He moved to the bedside and looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled, topped with a surprising amount of dark hair. The baby's eyes were closed, her miniature fists waving gently in the air. "She is so small," William whispered, awed. "Was I this small when I was born?" "You were," Margaret confirmed. "All babies start this way, small and helpless, depending on those who love them to keep them safe." "What will we name her?" Christopher asked, settling on the edge of the bed beside Margaret. They had discussed various options but reached no firm decision, waiting to see the child before choosing. Now, looking at their daughter, Margaret knew with certainty. "Grace," she said. "Her name is Grace, because that is what she represents. Grace after hardship, blessing after loss, hope fulfilled." "Lady Grace Linden," Christopher said, testing the sound. "It suits her perfectly." William reached out tentatively to touch his sister's tiny hand. Grace's fingers wrapped reflexively around his, and his face lit with wonder. "She is holding my hand," he breathed. "She knows me already." "Of course she does," Margaret said, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "You are her brother. Family recognizes family, William. Always." In the days that followed, as Margaret recovered and Grace settled into the rhythms of infant life, the household adjusted to accommodate its newest member. William proved true to his promise, helping in every way permitted, singing off-key lullabies when Grace fussed, and reporting her every movement and expression with the gravity of a naturalist observing a rare specimen. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the family gathered in the garden. Margaret sat on a bench beneath the ancient oak, Grace sleeping in her arms. Christopher stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder. William knelt in the grass nearby, attempting to teach Grace's sleeping form about the different flowers blooming around them. "This one is called a rose," he explained seriously to the unconscious infant. "It smells beautiful but has thorns, so you must be careful. And these are called tulips. They come in many colours and are father's favourites." Claire, visiting for the afternoon, watched the scene with satisfaction. "You have built something remarkable here," she said to Margaret. "A family forged through adversity but stronger for it." Margaret looked at her son, patiently cataloguing flowers for a sister too young to understand, and at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and at her husband, whose steadfast searching had made this moment possible. "We have been given a second chance," she replied quietly. "Not everyone receives such grace. I intend to honour it every day for the rest of my life." As twilight deepened and the first stars appeared, they remained in the garden, a portrait of the peace that comes after storms have passed. William eventually abandoned his botanical lecture to lean against Margaret's knee, his own eyes growing heavy. Grace stirred slightly, but did not wake. Christopher's hand tightened on Margaret's shoulder, a wordless acknowledgement of all they had survived and all they had gained. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain as all futures are, but faced together as a united family. The scars of the past 5 years would always remain, subtle shadows beneath the surface, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they served as reminders of resilience, of love's power to overcome cruelty, of the possibility of redemption even from the deepest grief. In the gathering darkness of Havershaw's gardens, surrounded by the scent of roses and the soft sounds of evening, the Linden family had finally found their way home to each other. And that, Margaret thought, as she looked at the faces of those she loved most in the world, was grace enough for any